What's up, wizards? It's Dev, Mtg, we like it a magic, and we have had Wilds of Eldraine in Standard for a little over a week and a couple of days at this point. So I think it's a good time to check and see how this set has affected the format so far. And on that front, there's actually a couple of pieces of good news, y'all. It turns out not only are Wilds of Eldraine cards themselves actually seeing play in the new Standard, kicking up some new archetypes we haven't seen in a while, but also, and maybe even more the story this week, has been about cards that already existed in Standard that are kind of getting a new lease on life now that this set is out. So let's not waste any more of each other's time. Let's go ahead and get into it. Look at the top 3 decks of the first week-ish of WOE Standard here, starting with Bo Mac Courier's deck that took second place in the first MTGO challenge of the year, and it is kind of an Invasion of Alara deck. This was on my top 25, and even I kind of forgot all of the things that it did, because it does an awful lot of stuff, so don't feel bad if you need this card read out to you. I certainly do, so let me cock my head to the side so I can read it sideways. It's a Wooburg battle with 7 loyalty, HP, whatever you call it. You got to hit it for 7 to flip it over. But we're not even really going to care too much about the flipped over half of it. We really just want the end of the battlefield trigger, which reads, when Invasion of Alara ETBs, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile 2 non-land cards with mana value 4 or less. You may cast one of those cards without paying its mana cost, and you put the other one into your hand, and the other ones go on the bottom of your library in a random order. So what this can do in this deck for some reason is hit Bramble Familiar and cast the adventure half. It's pretty nuts that the rules work that way. Maybe it's some sort of oversight. I don't know that it's on the level of some of the oversights we've seen in the last 10 years of Standard, but it is still a pretty cool thing. It may even be intended entirely, but yeah, because Bramble Familiar itself costs less than, it costs 4 or less, and you can hit it off of Invasion. But for some reason, again, you can cast Fetch Quest off of it, mill 7, then put a creature, enchantment, or land card from among the mill cards onto the battlefield. So you're trying to cast Invasion of Alara, and then hit Bramble Familiar, and then hit Atali, or Traxa, or even Fleshgorger or Cemetery Desecrator, speaking of cards that are kind of forgotten about, hyped up a little bit, especially by yours truly at the beginning of a season, and then they never really do anything. Cemetery Desecrator's finally found a home here. Cool things this does are, obviously, it's kind of a removal spell. It's also a 4/4 menace, so check that off. That's a good thing to be able to do, but even more importantly, in some ways in this deck, it's got an ulterior motive, right? We can always just remove 7 counters from the Invasion of Alara, right? We can use Cemetery Desecrator's first ability to remove 7 counters from it, where X is the mana value of the card we exiled when Cemetery Desecrator ETB'd. So we can exile the Atraxa, the Atali that's in our yard, right? The Virtue of Persistence, it also works with that. So pretty neat. The Phyrexian Fleshgorger, right? So all of these are 7 mana cost. So we can exile them with Cemetery Desecrator and flip over our Invasion, which is sick. It's so great. Flipped over Invasion and a 4/4 menace. I'll take that. So just absolutely disgusting. If you'll note, this deck is built in such a way that it always hits at least 1 Bramble Familiar off of Invasion of Alara. Sometimes it'll also hit a Go for the Throat, and they'll just put that in your hand, which is good. It's fine. You always are going to hit at least 1, sometimes both, or 2 Bramble Familiars when you cast an Invasion, which is just going to, again, just kind of cascade into like a Tally, Atraxa, Fleshgorger, Desecrator, whatever. So this deck is gross. You also get like Leyline Binding. You do get Virtue of Persistence, as previously mentioned. So if you do get like big guys in your graveyard, like a Tally, Atraxa, or whatever, you can just get them back with Virtue. This is also a removal spell, right? It lets you play like 2-drops without actually playing 2-drops. It's pretty awesome. So really well built, well thought out deck here. It's getting a lot of press in the initial sort of week of the format. It is not the most talked about deck, but a lot of people are talking about it. There's a reason for it. Really, really cool thing here. We get to play a couple of cards that like we were kind of excited about, but we never really have been able to play before. Invasion of Alara, Cemetery Desecrator. It's yet another use for this like Leyline Binding, Herd Migration, Atraxa sort of shell, but instead of just being like a kind of a boring ramp deck or a boring reanimator deck, it's got this ancillary like almost combo plan that I think is really, really cool. So I'm liking this deck a lot. I like the look of it at least. I haven't gotten to play it yet, but really sweet looking pile here. Let's move on to Soul Tie Reanimator here by Hikiyama Matsurika. 5-2 at a pretty well attended event. It fell slightly out of the top 8, but I still felt like this was a noteworthy deck. Now, full disclosure, there was a Golgari mid-range deck playing like Lord Skitter and Mosswood Dread Knight, right, at this same event that went like 8-1. It's probably the more impactful deck from this week because it actually had good finishes at a couple of events. Maybe we'll take a look at that one before we get out of here. But this was one of the decks I was most interested in, and it's not just like a straight up and down mid-range deck, right? There's kind of a lot going on here that I really like. First of all, I should point out, this is an Atraxa deck, so it could be boring to some people. We've seen a lot of Atraxa Reanimator, but this one goes about it in some really different ways, right? You get Colossal Sky Turtle in this deck as a 4-of, which is really, really sweet. I've always liked this card and a lot. I think it's very, very powerful. And really versatile too. I'm a big fan of the Sky Turtle. Glad to see that it's getting some play. Not even a Shigeki in sight, which is usually what this card sees play with. But no, it's just very, very value-driven sort of a deck here. And Colossal Sky Turtle does an awful lot, right? There's Gumdrop Poisoner in here too, which is really neat. I'll discuss this in a second. This saw play in more than one deck over the weekend. A couple of builds, I believe, of Golgari Midrange played a few copies, up to 4 in some instances, of this card. It is seeing some play. It's kind of a sleeper pick from the new set. There's a Shieldred in this deck, as you would expect. But this is where things start getting a little bit funky. We've got Collector's Vault in this deck. This is the 2-mana artifact. You tap it, you pay 2, you tap it, draw a card, discard a card, create a treasure token. So a nice little turn 2 and then turn 3 play for this deck to discard an Atraxa, create a treasure, and then play Lich Knight's Conquest. This deck is actually playing this card. I'm really, really happy because I love this card. This was like my number 1 or 2. It was in the top 3 of the Sleepers video for this set. So I'm a really big fan of this, man. 5-mana sorcery. It's got super bargain. Sack any number of artifacts, enchantments, or tokens, and/or tokens. Return that many creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. So even if all you get back is an Atraxa for 5 mana and you sack like the food token you got off of Gumdrop Poisoner, or the treasure token that you got a Collector's Vault, or the vault itself and you blow the treasure to help cast the spell, this is all fine. This is all fine. If you just get one Atraxa, you still like turn 4 Atraxa, you're fine, right? You're feeling good about that. But sometimes you'll also be able to get back, the Sky Turtle or another Atraxa and just Legend Rule and draw a bunch of cards effectively. You can sometimes get back a Gumdrop Poison or Shieldred, whatever. There's not a ton of creatures in this deck, but being able to use Colossal Sky Turtle to say, get something back from your graveyard or bounce something in the early game to give yourself some breathing room, and then just reanimate it because you happen to have a food token and, a Collector's Vault or an extra treasure or a Power Stone from Stern Lesson, which the deck also plays. I want to point that out. Maybe you just have a Power Stone laying around from this. You can sacrifice it to bargain or something, and then suddenly you get 2 creatures back, which is just mind-blowing. I think there's a lot of ways to use Lich Knight's Conquest. I'm especially interested in Olivia builds and stuff like that, where you just get back every creature in your graveyard. It's like 3 at one time, 4, it seems like this card could be really, really busted. This deck mostly opted for a plan of playing like a lot of removal and interaction and stuff like that. In the first few turns of the game, you've got Go for the Throats and Cut Downs and Spell Pierces, Tear Asunder, Essence Scatter, Negates. So just removal and counter spells for days, but you've also got Stern Lesson as an instant speed play to bin an Atraxa, draw some extra cards, get that Power Stone token out for the Lich Knight's Conquest. So I like that the deck sort of plays like a control deck, instant speed, whatever, for the first few turns of the game, and then sort of shifts gears into Reanimator mode. I think that there's a lot there in that sort of philosophy in the standard right now. If you can survive the first 4 or 5 turns and then rip off that Reanimator spell and just get the Atraxa, I think there's so much to say for that sort of playstyle right now. So again, I think there's kind of a lot here to be explored. I think that things like Stern Lesson are really good in a deck like this. Gumdrop Poisoner getting some love too. I think that card's great in this idea. Collector's Vault, I'm not so sure about it, but it is very cool to see it here, and obviously the deck did fairly well on the day. So just interesting to see some of the cards that are in this deck. Colossal Sky Turtle is a 4-of, again, just kind of blows my mind, but it's a very good card. And there's a bunch of new stuff in here. I didn't even mention the Virtue of Persistence. It's just kind of hanging out. It's a good card, extra Reanimator spell that's also removal. Might as well play it, just some stuff that you do not see every day, and some brand new cards getting some love in here, especially some you didn't think would, like Collector's Vault. So really, really neat deck for people who are sort of eagle-eyed on MTG Melee and looking for neat stuff. This is a good little pickup right here. I like it. But let's look at the last deck of the week. Maybe we'll circle back around to that Golgari midrange and just take a quick look. But we got to look at the talk of the town first. Undoubtedly, the deck everyone is on about this week. As I record this, CGB just made a video about it. MTG Goldfish just made a video about it. Seth freaking out for good reason. This deck is really, really cool. And it went 10-0, a perfect 10 at a 140-person tournament. So not a slouch in terms of the attendance figures either. Good job, you Non, who put this thing together. This is a Pia Nalaar deck. So yet another card that people expected things from, if not Standard, then Pioneer or Modern. People really, really like this card. Hasn't really done much in Standard, though, yet. But this apparently is the deck for it. It's just a 2-mana 2/3 Thopters you control, have haste. Whenever you play a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So it turns out that adventures obviously work with Pia Nalaar because you're casting spells from exile. When you cast the adventure and then cast the creature half. Now, when you cast the adventure, you don't get anything. When you cast the creature half from exile, you're getting a 1/1. So deck does some pretty neat stuff, you know. It plays Virtue of Loyalty. That's not a creature, right? But still, you cast the adventure half, and then later, when you cast Virtue of Loyalty, you'll get a 1/1 Thopter, and then every turn, you'll get a +1/+1 counter on all of your, you know, flying Thopters. That seems like a pretty good way to cinch up a game. But the other big new adventure in the deck that really helps things out here is Questing Druid. This is 1 and a green for a Kyrion Dryad. It's a 1/1 that gets a +1/+1 counter whenever you cast a white, blue, black, or red spell. And then it's got Seek the Beast. This is 1 and a red for an adventure that it's instant speed. Exile the top 2 cards of your library till your next end step. You can play them cards. So not only can you play Questing Druid out of exile to get a 1/1 Thopter, but when you Seek the Beast, whenever you cast the cards that you get off of Seek the Beast, then you get 1/1 Thopters for those too. Of course, the deck also has Reckless Impulse and Rin's Resolve, which do similar things to the adventure half of Questing Druid. And when you stack up like 12 of these effects, and not only are you kind of drawing an awful lot of cards, that's pretty sweet. You're churning through your deck really fast, but you're making a ton of Thopters. You're making so many Thopters. And if you ever have to say go, then, you get +1/+1 counters on them with Virtue of Loyalty, And if your opponent sweeps you, well, you kind of drew a bunch of cards. You might still have cards hanging out from Reckless Impulse or Rin's Resolve that you can cast on the turn after the sweeper. I played a deck like this somewhat recently on stream and did very poorly. Before this set came out, this was not a very good deck. But I have high hopes. I've always had high hopes for Pia Nalaar. And there were games where we were able to do some really, really, really cool stuff. Sometimes, even if they can sweep you, Reckless Impulse or Rin's Resolve has already exiled another Pia Nalaar. So you can just get back online and sort of get things going after the sweeper pretty easily. And if your opponent doesn't have a sweeper, they're just in trouble. This deck has a lot of stuff that the deck didn't have last time I tried it, right? It's got Questing Druid, huge threat, gets very, very big over the course of the game. You're just slinging spells around, And even if you can't get through with it, you've got a Voldaren Thrillseeker in this deck to come down and give the ability to the Questing Druid, and you just fling the Questing Druid at something. You can do that with Monastery Swiftspear too, I guess, but or late in the game if there's a stall and Virtue of Loyalty's been in play for 3 turns, you can just throw whatever at them with Voldaren Thrillseeker, or kill a creature with Thrillseeker's ability, and then that'll help you get through, right? Kill their flyer, get in with your Thopters. So deck has a lot more sort of angles it can attack from than the last time we tried something like this. So looks really, really sweet, man. This is one of those decks that not only did it go, 10-0 at a deck with a bunch of people playing, previously known to be viable strategies. So it's got that sort of competitive notch under its belt. We know it can perform. Is it a flash in the pan? Is it overhyped? Is it just because people weren't prepared for it? These are questions we'll answer as the format goes on. But for now, we know that the deck is good in the format that was. The format that people expected. The deck performs in that format. So not only does it have that going for it, but it just legitimately looks like a super fun deck, you're churning through your deck, you're drawing a bunch of cards, you're making a bunch of Thopters, just what a good time you're having playing this deck. There's 12 different card draw effects, just so you can see off the top of your head. There's probably more than that when you really dig into it. You get Chandra at the top end, so you just do really, really heinous stuff. You got mana to cast stuff, you can churn through your library and cast spells or whatever, so Just an absolutely sort of disgusting looking deck that again has so many angles that it can come at you from. So just really, really sweet here. It's kind of a tokens deck with the wedding announcement, all the Thopters flying around and stuff. Wandering Emperor, again, it can just create board presence if that's what it wants to do. But it also goes tall with the Questing Druid, just getting like really, really big, threatening to kill you out of nowhere with the Thrill Seekers. So just such a neat deck, dude. It's got removal too. It's got Light of the Night. It's got War Crafting. It's got 3 Destroy Evil, 2 Torch the Tower. So it's not like completely just like trying to do its plan and nothing else, So really like the number of sort of interactive elements that are in the deck too. Just really, really cool thing, man. I like this deck a lot. Again, not only should it be the number 1 deck of the week because of the 10-0, that's pretty impressive in a brand new format, but also just look how sweet it is. It's a really awesome deck. All right, so this is the Golgari mid-range deck. I really wanted to give you one more deck for this video. That's good though. There's so many new decks to talk about in the new format. I could talk about 2 or 3 more, but that's good. We didn't even get a rotation, and like there are new decks in this format that are obviously good. So let's take a look at the second place deck from the same tournament, actually. The deck that the Pia Nalaar deck came up against in the finals. This from Toshiro Saito is a Golgari mid-range. There are new cards in this thing, but it's basically what you'd expect. So again, straight up and down mid-range deck, kind of a mono black deck that splashes green. You got your Sheldrids in here, your Tenacious Underdogs, your Graveyard Trespassers, right? Go for the throat. Cut down. These are cards you expect to see in mono black and pretty much every like black X deck in standard. So why play this instead of mono black or black blue, which has been the more popular variant? And I think is still one of the better decks in the environment. Well, in this deck, you get Mosswood Dread Knight. Funny to see the deck is still playing Tenacious Underdog. So you got a lot of resilience in your creature base in this deck, right? Dread Knight is just, 1 and a green for a 3/2 trample. And when it dies, you can cast it from your graveyard as an adventure till the end of your next turn. The adventure happens Dread Whispers, 2 mana, 1 and a black, sorcery, draw a card, lose a life. So this gives the, Black X deck a sort of, card draw piece that it didn't really have access to before that also happens to be a resilient creature against the sweepers and the removal and blah, blah. So really, really cool card here. And obviously if you've got Sheldred out, you actually gain life when you cast the spell rather than lose life. So I like that about it too. You can play Glissa Sunslayer, just a really strong creature. If you're going to play black-green, at least a 2 of Glissa, and they went with a 3 of. Makes perfect sense, right? The deck also plays Blossoming Tortoise, though, the other sort of new card in the deck. There's at least one more. We'll get to it. But Blossoming Tortoise actually shows up. This is a good card. Like, I'll fully admit that Tortoise is a sweet card. Every time I've seen it played against me, it's either just got a sweet enter the battlefield trigger, it blocks once, and that's fine, or it runs away with the game. Like if it can ETV and then attack on the next turn and not die, right? Like if it can basically attack 3 turns without dying. Maybe it dies on the 3rd turn and gets blocked or something, but anytime it ETVs, attacks safely after that, like you just running away with the game. It's so much value. So, and then obviously it does a bunch of other stuff. It makes Mirrex less to use its ability or whatever. So it makes the creature lands bigger. So it is a sweet card, man. It really is. The deck also plays like Restless Cottage as a 4 of, so it kind of works with the Tortoise, just Mishra's Foundry, by the way, which also works with the Tortoise. I like what they're doing here. Just really, really cool card that they're facilitating in a number of ways. But even if it doesn't pop off and get you all the value, it blocked and got you a land. Like it's totally fine. So you got these channel lands in the deck too, so you can channel like Besage you early in the game, and then no matter what you hit with Blossoming Tortoise, you at least get back your Besage. So there's lines in the deck. Just Tortoise is very cool, but we also play Virtue of Persistence as a 3 of. This is showing up pretty much everywhere. This card is obviously as good as a lot of us thought it was going to be. It's a removal spell in the early game. It's a broken piece in the late game that gets back your Shellys, your Glissas, right, your Blossoming Tortoises for that matter, your Lord Skitter, which is also in the deck. Basically every Golgari mid-range deck that we saw over the past week is playing like a 2 of Lord Skitter. And I think that's really, really neat. This is just a thing that if it sits on the table for a few turns, it's going to create enough value to like help you force through. I really like that. Like the black-green decks basically get to play like Bitter Blossom now. It costs a little bit more. It's a little bit more fragile. The tokens aren't as good, but still, it's kind of a Bitter Blossom deck or a card for a mid-range deck right now, and that is a really, really cool thing. This isn't the only deck, by the way, green-black, that played Lord Skitter. We saw Esper Legends decks that added a 2 of Lord Skitter, so this card is kind of everywhere right now, too, in an interesting way, and it'll be fun to see whether or not this card sort of drops off in playability over the next few weeks. This is one that's like really on my radar, because I want to know if it's truly good enough, or if it's like a week 1 flash in the pan, we're going to try this card and see if it's good, or if it actually is. So really interested in whether or not this one does well. We did obviously test this out in Rakdos Rats, and it turned out to be really good in very long games where you're just trying to break through the stalemate. You eventually cast like Twisted Sewer Witch, and Lord Skitter's giving you like 6 rats over the course of the game, and you just win off of Sewer Witch. So it works some of the time, and I'm really interested to see if it truly works in a deck like this where it's just all about grindy value, and Skitter delivers that, right? So really, really neat deck. Not the best deck we saw all week, but definitely one I wanted to cover because I think it's important enough to take a look at. You should know about it. But that is it for the decks of the week for the first week of WOE Standard. Like I've said before, we don't usually do decks of the week every week. I mean, we didn't do them like once a month, so maybe I should just do decks of the month. But this won't be the only time that I cover decks from WOE Standard this season. But this is a relatively short season, right? The Ixalan set's coming out next, and I think that comes out in November, so it probably won't be that long until we get a spoiler season for that set, you know what I mean? It's a pretty short Standard season, but already proving to be a pretty diverse one, There's actually impact on the environment. Sure, things will adjust, and we'll have to see if it's one of those environments where these decks stick around, or if it's just like, Dimir mid-range, like, adjusts its sideboard slots to deal with Pia Nalaar and green-black mid-range, and then things just kind of go back to the way they were. But I doubt it, man. These new ramp decks look really cool. These Atraxa builds, obviously. Is this the new way to build Atraxa and Atali? We'll have to wait and see on that one too, But I do think that deck has a lot more dimension than it had when it was just kind of purely a ramp deck or purely reanimator deck that didn't have a whole lot of diversity or versatility to it, right? It just had the one game plan, and now it has multiple game plans. That's really, really sweet. It did lose some ramp, obviously. That could hurt it. But I think it just comes at you from a lot more areas now. And even though I think that it doesn't have the best early game in the world because that's how the deck has to be designed, I still think that once it does get to the point of the game it needs to get to, it's just basically lights out. What are you going to do about it as long as it resolves its spells? As far as Golgari midrange goes, I don't have all the faith in the world in midrange in a format that does have these like ramp decks and the Bramble Familiar sort of combo decks or whatever. I'm not sure those decks can live. But what do I know? 8-2 in one tournament, 8-1 in another. So it did really well over the last weekend. But we'll just have to wait and see on everything, man. I do think that a lot of these new decks look strong enough to really establish and keep a foothold in the format, but time will tell as it usually does. But that's all I've got for the sort of tournament report for the first week of WOE Standard. Let me know if you like this content so I can do more. I enjoy making them, so love looking at cool new decks, and there are always cool new decks every week. People always give Standard crap for being like stale, but at least once a week, some brave soul out there, some fool puts, does well in like an MTGO league or something with a deck we've never seen before. So it's the kind of stuff I like doing. Just let me know if you like it too, and I'll do a little bit more of it. But that's all I've got for now. Just let me know what you felt about all the decks, and if there's any big deck that I missed that got 31st place in the Standard Challenge and I just glossed over it, I want to know about those too. So anything cool going on out there in Standard, let me know in the comments section. But for now, I'm going to get out of here. Just do all the things, like, subscribe, hit up the Patreon. We need the money, blah, blah, blah. And, if you want to keep the lights on, check out the Patreon. All these links in the description, especially to, other videos. Nobody watched the Rabbits Deck Tech. Don't you want to watch the Rabbits Deck Tech? The first 2 minutes is hilarious. Give it a shot. Links in the description to content and stuff too. So do all the things, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.